I'd been going to college here in Washington State for 2 full semesters before I finally decided to join a fraternity. I'm not a party animal or anything, but the stories I'd heard about a particular fraternity's parties were enough to convince me that I had to do whatever it took to join it. Initiation week was exactly what you'd expect. They made us stay up for several nights in a row, eat some raw sardines, stuff like that. The crowning moment of initiation was that each initiate had to spend a night in the so-called murder forest just outside the city. This forest is famous in our area for being haunted. Apparently several serial killer victims were found there, and on top of that, people hear weird sounds sometimes. Still, lots of places have local legends, and I figured that the stories had been exaggerated to enhance our hazing experience. So the 6 other initiates and I hopped into vans and were driven to the edge of the forest. One of the older members told us that we should walk for about an hour along a path and that we'd find a campsite where we could spend the night. Each of us was carrying a backpack with a sleeping bag and tarp to lay on. I had been walking with the other guys in the group for 45 minutes. An idea crossed my mind. The rules we'd been given said we had to spend the night in the forest, not that we had to spend it in a particular area. They wanted us at that campsite so they could come in during the night and mess with us, I had no doubt. So I decided to set off into the woods by myself to avoid the hassle that sleeping in the designated campsite would bring. I congratulated myself on my smarts, thinking I had avoided any trouble. I was wrong. I walked for another 15 minutes or so by myself, lighting my way with a flashlight. I found a nice secluded spot with a clearing. I looked around and saw it was completely empty, so I set up my tarp and laid out my sleeping bag. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets, birds, and wind. I lay down in my sleeping bag feeling satisfied and flipped off the light. The forest fell silent. I don't mean to say that the wind lulled or that there was a momentary lapse in crickets. I mean that everything that could make a sound stopped making noise all at once. It was so sudden and so complete that I thought I had gone deaf. I pulled my hand up to my ears, but when I rubbed my fingers together, the soft rustling sounded out like normal. I looked around in the pitch darkness, but a thick layer of clouds made the night nearly absolutely dark. I was fumbling for my flashlight when I felt it. A warm, humid breath spread across the back of my neck, like a person was standing 6 inches behind me, blowing slowly. It stood in stark contrast to the chilly, early spring air I had been feeling up till then. My hand found the flashlight and I spun it around, illuminating the clearing behind me, revealing nothing but grass and trees. The instant my light turned on, the sound returned to the forest, crickets and cicadas chirping away softly. I started to stand up to leave, but stopped myself. I had to have been psyching myself out. All the stories from the frat must have just been getting to my head. I couldn't explain the silence, but I resolved to stay the night. I laid back down with the light and finally turned it back off. I half expected the forest sound to go with it, but thankfully the crickets and wind stayed constant. I laid in the darkness for a while, trying to relax my heart rate enough to fall asleep. After what must have been half an hour, I finally drifted off. I don't know how much time passed, but I was woken up by a new sound. It was the sound of rhythmic, heavy breathing, occasionally broken up by mumbling. The sound was coming from in front of my sleeping bag and high above me, probably some 30 feet away. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I took a picture with the flash to light up the clearing and saw a figure in the trees staring down at me. It was a woman wearing a long white dress. She had long black hair that covered her face, and her face, it looked like the skin had worn through in places. She was staring down at me. The image from the flash was burned into my mind. I kicked out of my sleeping bag and started running away through the forest in my bare feet. I couldn't hear motion behind me, but I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest where I got cell service. I grilled the members of the fraternity after I got back, but they each swore that they had nothing to do with it. I had been right about them scaring the other members of the group, but they had just used air horns and guns with blanks to scare them while they slept. I guess it's possible that they were behind it all, but I can't see how they could have made the forest silent or breathed on the back of my neck when not even the other initiates knew where I was. And that woman was not something fraternity members could have created. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mum loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped bothering even opening the door, until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mum pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mum, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the 3rd or 4th time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it looked funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mum's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it, despite the fact I'd seen my mum inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mum was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mum. He yelled back that Mum was inside, and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mum didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being opened that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exorcised just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest behind our house at night, but I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. 13 years ago, I went mute, and I am finally able to talk about what happened. From a young age, I was an extroverted and a stubborn girl. Although I always listened to my parents, but that time, at 12 years, I felt rebellious. My neighborhood held a Girl Scout camp. Every year, my parents didn't allow me to go, but this time I felt old enough, which was my first mistake. Me and Kelly, my best friend, begged our parents, but they refused because they are responsible adults who cared about us. But to us, 1-2-year-olds, they seemed like monsters. So, I made a plan. We told our parents that we are going to Katie's house for a sleepover. They talked to Katie's parents, and we did stay at Katie's for approximately 12 minutes, and then we left for our epic camping trip. Kelly decided on the place, Ludenberg Woods, and that was our second mistake. Kelly and I have been best friends ever since we were little. Recently it was her birthday, and I gifted her a unicorn bracelet, which she never took off. Our neighbourhood is surrounded by woods. The Girl Scout camp took place in the eastern part of Wisteria Forest, so we were quite far away. We didn't really have any camping gear, just 2 pillows, a blanket, a small Barbie tent, a flashlight, and some snacks, enough for a day. We rode our cycles from Katie's to the woods. At first, everything seemed nice. We heard birds chirping and cars go by. The weather was nice and warm. We saw squirrels and rabbits jumping around. But as we went on, the forest grew thicker. We were tired of running around, so we sat under a dark shaded tree. We ate our snacks, and I tried to scare Kelly, but what will happen next terrifies me to the core. As we started walking down the wrecked trail again, we couldn't hear or see any animals. The only sounds we could hear were of the rustling of the leaves. There was an eerie presence in the woods. I felt uncomfortable and suffocated. And then there was a sudden cloudburst. It felt like the whole woods were closing in on us. An ominous feeling wrapped around me. The trees looked like tall, intimidating creatures. The peal of thunder startled us, and both of us ran for shelter. In a state of panic, I realized that Kelly was missing. Fog surrounded me, so I couldn't see anything, but I could feel she wasn't here. After I calmed down, I investigated my surroundings and scouted for Kelly. As I said before, where I live was quite warm, but here it felt like it dropped about 10 degrees. Anyway, while walking down the path, I noticed something. It was iron. As far as I know, that wasn't natural. Why would there be human-made stuff so deep in the forest? I walked closer to it, and in betwixt of the fog, I saw an iron staircase. It seemed new, polished, and untouched by nature, almost as though time had stopped for it. It seemed like someone had cut the stairs from a house and put them here. I was so mesmerized by them that it didn't even register to me that all the sounds were blocked off. At this point, I could hear nothing but my own breathe. Looking at the stairs, I felt an unexplained morbid feeling to climb up them. At that time, I felt like it was a must to climb. I had no choice. So I did. I started climbing them. With each step, I felt disconnected from reality. Nothing mattered. Eventually, I couldn't even hear my own breathe. Or was I not breathing? You may think that creepy sounds and screams are scary, but no. Silence. Dead silence is the most terrifying thing that could destroy a person. This type of silence will make your skin crawl and make you want to rip your ears out. There was only the final step left between me and whatever lies beyond. The last thing that I could recollect was feeling a push. That's it. I fell and lost consciousness. When I woke up, it was still pouring, even heavier than before. After I made sense of what was happening, I felt like being watched. Then I heard my name Rebecca in a low, distorted voice. It didn't sound human. I got up and looked around and saw the thing that haunts my dreams. Every last thread of hope was shredded by this deep despair. What I saw was a thing so horrifying that I can't even begin to describe it. It was tall and had two dark holes for eyes, a huge distorted grin which stretched from one side to the other. It had huge limbs with sharp claws covered with disgusting blood. I was petrified looking at it. It continued to say my name in a now childlike voice. It began to walk towards me, repeating my name in the same disturbing voice. In a state of panic, I searched for a weapon and my eyes landed on a piece of wood. Without thinking, I swung the piece of wood, hitting it until it was a bloody mess. After I realized what I had done, I ran away. I kept running and running. In my attempt at escaping that demon, I barely noticed the sounds of the woods. Panting and gasping for air, I finally made it out and dashed to my home away from the deathly forest. I broke in and started crying hysterically. Kelly's parents, the Adams, were also there talking with my parents. All of them shared the look of despair on their faces. There were cookies on the coffee table which were untouched. My once sugar-loving parents were now anxiously making phone calls. My angsty teenage brother was actually out of his room and nervously listening to the conversation. Kelly's mum, Mrs. Adams, who once was a fashion diva and always wore makeup, was rough and sobbing, and even Mr. Adams, the most cheerful person I knew, was on the verge of tears. When their eyes met mine, they were completely taken aback. Mom threw everything, including the expensive new cell phone, and ran towards me. They hugged me so tightly that it was hard to breathe. All my anxiety faded away when my mum brushed the dirt off my face. For a second, everything was roses and butterflies, until I saw the look on Mr. and Mrs. Adams' faces. I could feel hope blossoming in their hearts. Their hope was like a beautiful stained glass window which was shattered by the despairing news of the absence of their daughter. When they questioned me about Kelly, my silence gave them the answer. I could see the colour drain out of their faces. The forest rangers searched the entire forest until they came across a battered mess which DNA confirmed to be Kelly. It seemed she was beaten repeatedly with a blunt object. She seemed like an unrecognized pile of flesh. Kelly, who once was a high-spirited girl, obsessed with unicorns and nature, was now a part of the soil. We identified her because of the bracelet I gifted her, which was also covered with blood. Nearby, they found a piece of wood covered with the blood of Kelly, which was likely the murder weapon. There was no trace of fingerprints, footprints, or any other evidence due to the torrential rain giving an upper hand to the culprit. Now, even after 13 years, they couldn't identify the perpetrator of this crime. I've told this traumatic tale to many, but there's one detail I always fail to mention. After hitting the monster, my eyes laid upon the lifeless body of my best friend, Kelly Adams.